Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. Shamika Michelle is parking the car. Don't worry, she will be here shortly. And our guest this week is Delano Squires. He is a contributor with Fearless, with Jason Whitlock, writer for The Blaze, and fellow scholar at 1776 Unites. Delano, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Well, we can have our little 1776 powwow until Shamika comes in and brings the fire. But we've been trying to schedule a time to meet with you, and because we knew whatever we talked about, you would bring a lot of logic and deep thought to the topic. But you proposed one. I said, let's go with what you wanted to talk about. You wanted to talk about the Black family. So let's start the conversation by you telling us why you think that is an important thing to talk about in these times.
Sure. I mean, I'll start with my sort of primary point up front, right? Which is that there is no context in which I think there will be progress in the Black community over the next generation unless we begin to talk about and address many of the issues that are sort of most prevalent in the Black family. So I don't care if someone believes that we need reparations or larger government, more generally speaking, if we need anti-racist amendment, whatever other sort of social or economic programs people suggest. My point is that if we don't address the issues in the family, right, and this is a larger point, but specifically we're talking about the Black community, none of that stuff is going to matter. So that's my general point. I talk about it a lot, write about it with Fearless, and have been writing about it probably for the better part of the last 10, 11 years. First with the website Black and Married with Kids, and then from my time with The Root and the Griot, my own blog, and then with the Federalist and now the Blaze. So that's my primary point.
Okay, so before any of us jump in, and welcome Shamika to the show.
Hey, Shamika.
And and before we jump in, to catch other people up, let's talk about. Like you say, you've been writing about it for 10 years, so you know what these things are. So let's explain. Obviously, if you think there's a lot of them, you don't have to hit on all of them right away. But what some of these issues are that you talk about, there are issues in the Black family. So what are the issues that are holding back the progress in all these other things that people think are more important to focus on?
Sure. And again, we're talking about the Black family, but these are issues that apply to all Americans because the rates, particularly of non-marital birth, or what they used to call out of wedlock birth rates, are going up for everyone across the board. Our rate is actually probably not going up as high just because it's been higher. It's been above 50%, I'd say, since the mid 80s. It's been above 70%, I think, since the 90s. So that's one of the biggest issues. So the data that shows that about 3 out of 4 Black children are born to parents who aren't married. So that's a big one. Another one, and this is where sort of the family issues sort of intersect with other big policy issues or cultural issues. So, for instance, abortion. So the abortion rate, for instance, in New York City, where I grew up, it's about half of Black women's pregnancies in New York City end in abortion. It's about almost, the numbers are exactly even in terms of live births and induced abortions. Nationally, I believe the rate is about 30%. And also Black women make up about close to 40% of abortions nationally. So those are just 2 data points. There are others because the data, and I know Will can speak to this as a social scientist, there's decades of data that link family structure to all different types of social and economic outcomes. And time after time, it shows that children who are raised by their married biological parents, particularly in low status relationships, low conflict, marriages tend to do better across the board than any other type of structure. Obviously, and I'll give this caveat one time. This is not to say that if you're a child raised in a different family structure that you will not do well, because obviously we all know and love and care for people who have been raised in all different types of family structures. But, the presence of an exception does not negate the norm. In fact, it reifies the norm. So all I'm saying is every child has two parents. And this is one of the few disparities that the Black leadership class does not want to talk about. If there was a 20% disparity in unemployment between Black folks and white folks, all of the usual suspects on the left will be talking about it. But when it comes to issues of family and marriage, they want to stay away from it. And in fact, one of the biggest problems, and I've written about this recently with The Blaze, is that some of the people who are most antagonistic towards marriage in America writ large, but particularly in the Black community, are the Black elites. These are the people, the Melissa Harris Perrys, the Brittany Coopers, the Michael Eric Dysons, who will go on MSNBC, have a panel about the magical Black daddy myth and ridicule the importance of Black fathers. And then Michael Eric Dyson goes over to Fox News on Tucker Carlson's show and begs white people for reparations. You understand? So we see where their priorities are. So it's something that I think is important, but part of the, what I see as my job is to not only talk about why it's important, but talk about, who and what are the roadblocks to progress in this particular area.
Well, I think at some point we're gonna have to squeeze in conversations about that clip that you referenced there, because that was really interesting. It was years ago, but you reposted it because it's shocking. But first, normally I'd want to go with Shamika, but you referenced Will. Will's the data guy, and he likes to talk about this. So I want to go to you, Will, to give us your thoughts on what he said. But also, I want to ask you a question about, kind of like your book Taboo, that, bursting myths and saying things that you're not supposed to say. Why is it the data's there? Everybody knows it's the case. So, I like to talk about solutions. So why is it that instead of trying to improve some of these things, they rather explain it away or ignore it completely? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one that actually gets into some of the failures of social science. So, I think Delano's point is just, without getting too wonky, just obviously accurate. I noticed myself get into lecture mode there. But yeah, if you look at, Walter Williams is good on this, for example, on kind of the Black right. He points out that in 1945, close to the modern era, World War II, the out-of-wedlock birth rate, what he called the illegitimacy rate, was about 4% for whites. It was maybe 10%, 10 to 12% for Blacks, maybe, probably toward the lower end of that. Remember, even during that Moynihan Report era, late 60s, it's 23%. That's what shocked the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's well below the rate for whites right now. But those rates have increased just exponentially. Black rate right now is at 72%. White rate, that's at 35, 36%.
Mm-hmm.
Hispanics, people often neglect this, but Caucasian Hispanics aren't far behind Blacks, if behind at all. It's 66% last I looked. Native Americans right up there. So nationally, more than half of all kids across Blacks, whites, Hispanics, even natives, only Asians are escaping this, are born without an in-home married dad. So that's the biggest problem in the country. The panel, the three of us are men, although obviously the star is always the Shamika. But this is real. This is obviously something no one with eyes can ignore. So why is it so often ignored? I think one of the problems in social science is that we have these basic foundational theories. I mentioned I often argue with people on the left that I think are, normal brothers is the phrase that came to mind, smart guys, but that believe a lot of this stuff. Rod Graham comes to mind. But their starting point is always this theory, we have to look at Marxist replication theory or something like this. This is everything we see must be due to X. And I'm not attributing this to Rod or someone like this, but Ibram Kendi, classic guy, he said this: any gap you see, just attribute it to racism, because it's almost always due to racism. So when you see a problem, if you see rising illegitimacy rates, I assume you would say the cause of that must be racism. If you see a problem with marriage, probably racism. There's also an underlying sort of almost communist trend in the social sciences towards seeing the family as bad.
Yes.
The family is the impediment to the state. You need to break the church and break the family and break small business, and then heaven comes. The reality is that that's exactly the reverse of what you'd get coming from, Chicago and the New Jack City era. But anyway, so I think the combination of the idea that, one, the family isn't something we necessarily want anyway in the social sciences, and two, to the extent we want it, the gap must fall into a pre-existing theory and must be due to some Marxist race or class problem. That 1-2 structure there has prevented any real discussion of this. The reality, once you take the horse blinders off and you just start looking at this as a smart, ordinary person, I mean, we talked again before the show about the different backgrounds people can have: military, hood, business. It's really obvious what happened. I mean, you had the implementation of mass welfare, you had the later waves of feminism, blah, blah, you had all this, the 60s and 70s, and every year as those things went on, you saw the illegitimacy rate go up.
Mhm.
It's not rocket science. It's just the theory, which is wrong, doesn't allow for that. So people following the theory just ignore that because it can't have happened. The emperor's clothes are beautiful.
Well, I'm going to go to Shamika, and I would never try to tell her what she can and cannot talk about, but I would like to give her a suggestion. One of the things that we'll put at the end that I think is so important, one of my approaches is to give the left their argument because it's so weak. And if we give them the argument that every gap is attributed to racism, here's the funny thing about the family, though, and you mentioned it there at the end, Will. Every other gap is unfair because of racism, is caused by racism, but the thing that we're separated from is bad that it's a gap, right? So income levels is a disparity, is a gap, it's unfair, and it's racism that's causing it. But we want blacks to have that same income, right? Everything else, we want blacks to have the same thing that others have, and the reason we don't have it is because of racism. But here's an odd twist: the black, one parent household, we want to say unwed, the parent may still be involved. We'll get to that down the road, but the child growing up in a black family without two parents is, many percentage lower than others. That's a gap. It's caused by racism. But no one's saying on the hard left that needs to be fixed. We want to have the same number of fathers in the home as the white family. They're not saying that, right? You got BLM saying dad bad. You got cis heteropatriarchy. So I want to know, Shamika, why you think that is, to piggyback on what Will said. And is that part of the biggest problem? Or, anything else you want to comment on what Will or Delano had to say?
First, let me apologize. I'm not feeling that great, so bear with me. But of course, I believe that feminism was a large cause of that. And I remember Delano saying before, like, it didn't just have an effect on women, but it had an effect on men as well. And I think when you're constantly telling a man you don't need him, he tends to believe that. And I think that that's what we've been doing for generations, saying as women, we don't need a man. We are, I can do bad by myself, or I'm just as good alone, or whatever. And I think that has really had an effect on the black family. A lot of times it's because the woman, she doesn't need the man, or she claimed that she doesn't. And I think that society has supported that idea in the fact that you hear people talking to women that want to be married and want to be wives as pick-me's, and they ridicule women for actually wanting to have a man. Excuse me. And so I think that society has kind of upheld that, if you want to be with a man, you're told that you're weak-minded. They just automatically assume you're a doormat. They speak so negatively about submission that it's almost like women are embarrassed to actually say, not only do I need a man, I want a man, because you're looked at so negatively.
Right. Oh, that's true. Delano, I want to know what you think about, you're talking about the black family. Obviously, there are issues, but there's been also some level of a shift in both roles, the effectiveness, the expectations of the black family. So talk about that, the quote unquote patriarchy, or the behaviors that we allow and don't allow and condone, or Because to be fair, and people will push back and say, well, yes, 70 some odd percent of black children live in single parent households, but that doesn't mean that the other parent is not involved. But
Right.
in many cases, it is limited involvement, right? So it's not the same. There are things that you just can't do if you're only there on the weekends. I mean, you do the best you can. So talk a bit about why there's what the difference really is. And even when they're both there, I think there's changes when both parents are home. The way those parents rear the children and the expectations are different today than a two-parent black household in the 70s.
Yeah. I mean, and I've heard some of those responses, and a couple of things. One is, and Shamika brought this up in terms of the dynamic between men and women and how that often impacts, men's involvement in the lives of their children, right? Just informally, I would say at least 50% of a man's relationship with his children is going to be predicated on his relationship with their mother. And sometimes you'll see this with guys who have multiple children by different women, and you'll see how much closer he is with one particular child. And oftentimes that's because he has a better relationship with that child's mother. But even if you love all of your children equally, if you know that with one child, seeing them, interacting with them is a stroll in the park, and with another child, seeing and interacting with them, particularly with their mother, is climbing Mount Everest, most guys are going to say, okay, I'm going to take the path of least resistance. They may not want to do that, but over time, you just get worn down. It's like, okay, I got to fight about this. And she's taking me to court about that. And then she's upset because I'm dating somebody new. So it's interesting because the left, the people on the left who like to talk about structure so much, don't acknowledge that marriage is the greatest structural enabler of father involvement. Because when a man stands before his family, friends, and his God and commits to one woman, I'm talking ideal. I'm not saying it always goes this way. I'm talking ideal. He commits to one woman. Inherent in that commitment is a commitment to everything that comes from that particular union. So they are pulling all of their forces moving in the same direction, ideally. But when he has one over here, and he got one over there, and he got one across town, and he got one in another state, he may have enough money to spread around, but he doesn't have enough time. So part of my argument is both data informed, but as a father of 3 children, part of it is just, and I don't go to the sort of the emotional and the touchy-feely stuff, but honestly, I think every child should have the security of knowing that when they sit up in the middle of the night with a stomachache or the flu or a bad nightmare and they yell out daddy, that somebody is going to come lumbering down the hallway, scooping them up in their arms and say, what's wrong? But for a lot of kids, they yell out daddy and it's just an echo down the hallway. And eventually they stop calling for them altogether. And all of those things have impacts down the line. So that's how you get grown men, whether they're professional athletes or the 44th president of the United States, who say, I spent my entire life trying to prove that I was worthy of my father's, love and attention. And you see that sometimes in its most serious sense, when I talked about whether Obama or, other athletes have talked about it, but you also see it when you look at somebody like Colin Kaepernick. You can't tell me that this guy doesn't, yes, there's mixed race issues, there's adoption issues, which if you pull both of those apart, oftentimes there are issues of identity and acceptance in both of those. But part of it is like, if you don't know who your father is and you've never known who he is and you've never felt accepted by the family that adopts you, you're going to have issues. And all of us got to suffer for it. So instead of Colin Kaepernick taking himself to therapy, to counseling, and really unpacking how he feels about not being wanted or desired by his biological family, he puts the stuff on Netflix and I got to sit through it, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, you got to be accepted by the white man. No, you don't. No, you don't. That's because you feel like you weren't accepted by the person who created you. And now you are projecting that lack of security onto your entire life and onto people who didn't ask to be brought into this sort of narcissistic cosplay. That's one thing. Real quick, the other thing I'll say is this. You asked about the changing norms, right? I'm gonna put my cards on the table. I am an aspiring patriarch. I would like that in the next, Lord willing, if I have enough years, that when I'm 80 years old, that my children and my children's children and my children's children's children come to me and say, Dad, Pop, I got a problem. Can I talk to you for a minute? And I can impart wisdom on them. Now, some people may say, well, why patriarchy? I mean, if a thing has two heads, it's a monster. If it has no heads, it's dying or it's dead already. So we've seen what 50, 60 plus years of matriarchy has given us. And if somebody thinks that those results are desirable, then we could keep going down that way. But part of what I'm arguing for is not just the impact that men have on their children, but it's the impact that when you break apart two things that were meant for one another, the man and the woman, whether you take this from Genesis like I do, or you take this from genetics, or some people may say evolutionary biology, whatever it is, bodies literally meant to fit together. And you take that apart and you substitute the government and you think that you're going to get the same results, you're kidding yourself. So my thing is this. All of us have probably had an occasion of having a flat tire, putting a spare on, and getting to where we need to go. But nobody with common sense would ever buy a car manufactured with a spare, because part of what makes a car work is 4 functioning tires. You can use the spare for a period of time as a spare, but when you go into it saying, no, I want to buy that expensive car with a tire that's 40% too small for it, you're going to have trouble. And when you go into the same thing, like the norms that we've established, particularly in the Black community, where marriage is becoming a luxury good, mainly found in the upper middle class, the upperly mobile, the college educated, and in many respects completely absent in the working sort of lower class, low income communities. When that's your norm, you're going to have problems. And that's why the Black elite, they don't want to talk about that, because this is the one issue we can't blame on white people. We would rather focus our attention on the things that we think are the real problem. Racism, inequitable wealth distribution. And that's why for the Afrostocracy, their solutions are always the same. Better white people and bigger government. And we've seen that those two things are just not working.
Well, you said something at the beginning of that's interesting to me. You talked about how for a moment, it's like, I'm not going to get emotional about it. Just like, you just want to be really common sense about it, just like in the simple terms. Well, going further down that route, I don't understand why, just from a practical standpoint, it's not easy raising a kid to be good, right? Mm-hmm. It's not, there's only so many hours. You got job demands, right? You got, activities at school. It's just hard from a time standpoint, mm-hmm. one. So you would think just practically it'd be easier to have someone else there. If your man's not working, that may create some strife, but you were paying for daycare the other way, so there's somebody there to watch the kid, things like that. But beyond that, you also talk about, patriarchy, and gender comes up, and the norms, and now we're in a society where it's they poo-poo you and they look at you funny for talking about gender norms. But at the same time, giving them their argument, if you can pick your gender, whether we agree with it or not, then there must be something to pick, right? If there's no difference between men and women, and there are no difference between the genders, then why are you even bothered to pick it? We're just people who walk around. Why are you a woman that said, no, I'm actually a man? Then you must have something in your mind that you think being a man is.
Right.
So I always found that, interesting. When I wrote a chapter in my last book about gender, and what I found interesting is no one has a problem. I just want consistency. No one has a problem with a woman saying, raising her daughter to be like her, and doing makeup and playing with dolls and doing all this kind of stuff, and saying, as a woman, there's certain things I can teach my daughter that my husband or my man can't teach her. He's not a girl, which is totally fine. But if you said that in the reverse, they look at you funny. Well, I don't need no man, as Shamika said. But why? How can you teach that 13 to 15-year-old boy what it's like to be a 13 and 15-year-old boy? You've never been one.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me that they want to talk gender all day long, but they don't believe that they like matriarchy. They want to tear down the patriarchy. So
Right.
that still means that there's a difference between the two. And if you have both, you have help, and then you have what is the norm, from a female and a male general perspective. If you only have one, you must be missing something, but they don't want to acknowledge that. Shamika, what do you think about that?
I think I agree with you, and also it's okay to let a woman say she's the mother and the father. I just saw a post that the Shade Room made. I think it was the Shade Room a couple of days ago, where some celebrity was downing her rapper, I guess, baby daddy, who's not around as much. And she was saying, I am the mother and the father, and this is a tough job, blah, blah, blah. And people in the comments, except for conservatives, because I saw some people that I knew letting her know you cannot be the mother and the father. But
Right.
some of the other people were applauding that as if it's actually possible. And I just don't understand why more people won't stand up and tell these women it is impossible for you to be the mother and the father. And we're not saying that you can't be a great mom if the dad isn't around, but being a great mom doesn't make you a dad. And it's like we celebrate dysfunction because there's no way that you can be both, and women don't realize that that child is missing out. And especially like you were saying with Delano, sometimes what you were saying, Delano, sometimes women make it very difficult for the man to be around. And they'll always tell the men, or I hear people telling the men, you need to fight harder to be around your child. My question is, why do you have to fight at all? There should not be a fight when it comes to a man being in his child's life. And I don't understand why, one, women make it so tough, and two, people support her in this type of foolishness.
Well, it's not a child; it's a bargain. It's a bargaining chip.
Yeah, look, one comment there though. Like, I broadly agree with Shamika. I mean, so first of all, we see this every Father's Day, right? Like, beyond the mother and the father. Like, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and every Father's Day, I'll tap out a line from my dad. He's passed, and you'll see all my female friends will be saying, and it is 2/3 or more of my female friends, which indicates the problem. But we'll be saying things like, when it comes to my young king, I'm the mom and the dad, and then the guys will get involved and all this. My personal comment, though, is I do think instead of men and women criticizing each other about this, and I suppose as a man, I'm more inclined toward Shamika's perspective, but I really think there are institutional factors that have kind of led to this. I mean, in terms of why there are so many absent dads, especially in the Black community. I mean, a lot of it is almost the sort of government becoming the surrogate parent stuff. I mean, you saw mass welfare through the late 1990s until Clinton and Gingrich got rid of that. You still see more than you might think down at the state level. No-fault divorce. I mean, just a whole bunch of things. I mean, one of the very few men's rights claims that's legitimate is the child support system. How families can very easily be separated. These aren't rules that have always existed. These aren't in the 10 Commandments. I mean, this is stuff that was laid down between, again, the 70s and the 90s. So I think that I often hear women say nearly the same thing in reverse that the men do. I mean, these bum-ass men, they were able to leave a marriage essentially at will. They contribute almost nothing, then I can keep the kids away from them by law. So it's both sides of the picture. And I think really fixing this would require, so I'll say this, America would have to make a commitment toward having families again. I mean, would we be willing to get rid of most welfare programs and encourage people to work? Would we be willing to say, if you want age, you have to go bust your ass, dig lakes like the Civilian Conservation Corps used to make people do? Would we be willing to say you need fault for a divorce? You used to have an actual reason you had to bring into court: impotence. She nags constantly. He beats you. I mean, and I imagine these became ugly cases. I imagine people wanted to settle by week 1. But I mean, like, you couldn't just say, I feel... Okay, so I'm going to avoid a full-on ramble here, but, like, did any of you see this article? I mean, we've all worked with FAIR, we've all worked with 1776. Did any of you see this Substack article that ran today, like, Why I Left My Husband or something like that?
I didn't
I, w-
see that,
I
but
was
I'm glad
actually.
to know impotence is one of the cases.
So I've heard. I mean, I've never actually. Just a funny random story. I was talking with one of my guys the other day, and we were in like Buffalo Wild Wings or something. He was like, when you break up with a girl and she starts saying you never were good in bed and all that. And me and the other guys at the table were like, no, I don't know what that's like, bro. I've never been there. And then everyone was like, I mean, I understand what you're saying. It wasn't a mean moment. It was just funny. But no, there's this article, Barry Weiss, who's great in general,
Yeah.
former New York Times editor, but posted on Substack something that I think she thought people would be sympathetic to. It was a former Times colleague, upper middle class woman, I believe white, doesn't really matter.
I think it
But
ran
she
in
was-
the Atlantic. I was reading it. Yeah.
the Atlantic. Absolutely. No, yeah, that's an even better description. Obviously didn't originate on Twitter. Yeah, it was an Atlantic piece. But it was like, I was redecorating my house with my husband. It was like this bucolic scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we were in the kitchen and we were deciding whether or not to get English standard cabinets or something else. And we were looking at all these colors. And I was realizing, what a stable, normal marriage this was. And then I realized I didn't want that shit. Like, she goes through this whole thing. Like, I realized I had moved away from thinking about the patriarchy and exotic sex. I'm not exactly who I want to be. So she divorced the poor guy. She moved back to New York City, moved into like a walk-up. She was talking about how her apartment was too small for the dishes and shit she'd brought back. She couldn't cook in her oven. So, I mean, I think that the initial presentation of the piece was what an interesting exploration of someone making this critical, important decision. But just as with most divorce stories and most abortion stories, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. People were saying things like, you were in a stable marriage, in a nice house, happy with a couple kids, and you got divorced because you thought sex was off by 5% or whatever. That's crazy. We need to stop encouraging this pathological behavior. That was the reaction. I tend to agree. But my point in a sentence is, are we going to do that? Are we going to go back to are we going to put in child support laws that give men a voice? Or abortion laws that give men any kind of voice? Are we going to, on the flip side, for men, are we going to say you can't just leave your wife? There would have to be steps to stabilize families. That's something no one wants to tackle.
Well, I was going to say something really quick to go even before you even get to all those other things you have to do. Here's another thing that everybody seems to stop doing but the Japanese. But here's another interesting thing we used to do. We used to guilt people.
Oh, yeah.
How about that? You used to be, you go watch some of these old 30s and 40s movies. I'm a weird guy. I used to love those movies. And it'd be a guy who's he's alcoholic. He's down on his luck, bum guy, but he's got a lovely supporting wife. And he's like, I don't want to go back home. And the other guys in the bar like, take your butt home. What do you mean you're not going to go home? They would be like, you can't just go walk out on your family. They would look at you like you were crazy. Now, the women, what you're talking about, the women, you're right. They make it, you can say welfare was part of it, true, but now society has made it easy for them to go, not just the welfare and the no-fault divorces, just the fact that everybody thinks it's okay. You can go on Twitter, on social media and brag about, the third world. Well, weren't you just married to somebody else while you posting pictures at a party with your new girl? It's like, but isn't he married? And nobody guilty of it. People are like, you're a shady dude, right? No, I'm not working with you. You walked out on your family. It would have an effect. I don't have a problem with shame. I think shame is great.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've long thought that our desire to make people feel included and a sense of belonging has really compromised our ability to use shame in its proper proportion as like a social and cultural prophylactic, right? I'm not talking about shaming someone for something they've already done that they can't take back, right? So I'm not saying 18-year-old girl gets pregnant and the kid is 10 years old and you're still saying shame, shame. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there's certain things that I did not do as a teenager, right? There's certain ways that I didn't cut up with my friends on the bus because I say, you know what? We're not doing that. When you saw an older lady come on the back of the bus, you say, all right, chill. Because we didn't want to bring shame to our family. We didn't want to be known as the kids who don't know how to control themselves out in the community. But our society is such that whatever a person wants to do, however they want to dress, however they want to carry themselves, even in the height of the pandemic last year, when at the point where we knew that, hypertension and diabetes were comorbidities, you had magazines running ads with women who were obviously obese on the cover and saying, this is what a healthy body looks like. And again, you don't have to go out and attack people to say No, that's not healthy. If you're 5'2" and 285 pounds, that's not healthy. But we've lost the ability to do that. And I think, to everybody's point, a lot of what we're talking about is cultural. Now, I do agree with Will. There may be certain policy things, policy levers that we can sort of turn to make some, changes on the margins. But a lot of this is cultural. It's about the things that we see as norms. When you read stories from the 1950s, the business exec who leaves his family for his secretary was a sort of well-established and recognizable meme. Now you have the eat, love, pray woman who's not fulfilled with her career, her life, and her 2 kids, and then the white picket fence. And now she leaves her family, and she's seen by some people, particularly the elites, as some type of hero. But I wanted to go back to something Shamika said real quick, because she used the dreaded S word, right? Submission. And when it the more controversial, the more I want to push into it. And I've long thought this as it relates to submission, particularly because I hear this sort of in Christian circles, because the scriptures that talk about, husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church, and wives submit to your husbands, so on and so forth. I think I will tweak it a little bit. I don't think that women, generally speaking, have a problem submitting to men. I think wives have a problem submitting to their husbands, because the same woman who, when her husband says, hey, we talked about this particular issue, I think we should go in this direction, this is the best for our family. The same woman who kicks and screams and pushes back and says, I'm not doing that, and da-da-da-da-da, regardless of her race. When her boss asks her to work overtime, or if she worked for Puffy, to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge to go to Junior's and get a slice of cheesecake, she's going to do it, because she sees ascendance in that corporate structure as something that's worthwhile. She sees establishing, building, growing her career in a corporate environment as something that's worthwhile. What we've lost is the sense that establishing, building, and growing a home together, husband and wife, working with one another, like 2 hands working together for the benefit of their children and their future progeny. Many women, particularly ones who have been impacted by feminism, and as Shamika said, and I've said this before, many men no longer see that as worthwhile. So even though we live in a context in which the left is constantly pushing Marxism, at the end of the day, to many of them, certain actions and behaviors only have value if they generate income. And that's why, as I said, it's not necessarily, that particular woman has a problem submitting to men. Because as I said, if her boss, whatever he asks her to do, obviously outside of anything that's unethical, she'll do it because she sees the value. But when her husband comes in and says, hey, I think we should do, then it's, nah, you in for a fight, buddy. And that just goes to show you that, it's really that particular relationship where you see the most tension. And once that relationship between men and women, particularly as it relates to marriage, not long-term cohabitation, because America is not like Europe. You typically, if a man and woman have a child together and they're not married, they're not going to be in a monogamous relationship for 30 plus years and raise their children together in the same home. What's more likely is one or both of them is going to go on to have other children with other partners. And then they're going to have to sort of navigate life with all those different permutations. So I just wanted to say that. And I think, as I said, the cultural issues here are the ones that I'm most eager to address. And I think, we can get to this. I think there's some tangible steps that we can take to address those moving forward.
I think that it's kind of important that it's so basic and logical. You think I shouldn't have to say it, but it's important to note that, marriage is a choice. Right. So when you talk about people not wanting to submit or thinking it's hard or this or the other, and whether we agree with it or not religiously, people used to get married, really young or get married and not have sex until they get married. That's less likely now. So it's not like you didn't have sex before, right? So it's not, for these people to just get out of the marriage for all these easy things. But a lot of times you look at it. I mean, the stats are there, right? Well, people date for 12 years and they live together for 10 years and everything's fine. And then they get married. And then in 6 months we get divorced. What, did it change? It's to say you were well, I didn't know what it was like until I met him. But, you used to be able to say that 50 years ago, but not now because you were living with him for this amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But there are obviously some instances where the person felt coerced or things of that nature. But in most cases, that's not the case. You could have easily not gotten married. So they choose to get married, whether they've been living together or not, whether they've been dating for 10 years or 6 months. And then they go in it. And I think to Will's point, a lot of it is because the social norm and Will and me together, right? My no shame anymore and the ease to get out of it. They're like, oh, what the hey? You want to get married? I didn't think about it, but what the hey? Even if I don't like it, it's like crackers. I just don't need another cracker, right? But for whatever reason, they don't think about how serious this step is and what it entails. So they just do it, right? So, I don't feel so sorry for them because it's a choice. You didn't have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple different components. I mean, so I think obviously the cultural point that Delano is making, that you're making, I mean, yeah, that's true. There are radically different attitudes towards sex than there used to be in the past. I mean, and to some extent this is good, to some extent this is bad. Not again to just wonk out with the numbers, but I think it was Miss Magazine in like 1973 found out that only like 15% of men knew what a clitoris was. Like, they just asked these dudes, like, do you understand as part of pleasuring your woman what the clitoris is, the bump at the top? And these guys were like, I don't know. I'm not really familiar with it.
Well, shouldn't that be a reason why divorce should be less now?
Well, actually, no. That's interesting. That's funny, but it's interesting. Like, if you ask people who has the best sex life, the people that say they have the best sex life are always like black and white Southern evangelical Christians. And then if you start asking them questions, like, does he go down with any skill? They're like, no. I mean, so it's just like regular sex. It's like missionary and doggy style. They do it 2 or 3 times a week. They like each other. But it's the presentation is, this is awesome because I don't have the experience of sex with 50 other dudes or women, to be fair. So actually, no, like, as more and more men got more and more sexually experienced, the average person now, I remember looking at this to see if I was above the average, but the average person now is hooked up with, like, it's still a fairly low number, but it's like 30 people.
You said a fairly low number.
That's not a high number. I mean, but still, it's up from 1. The average for women used to be like 2.
I'm about to say, but the number's not saying 30 wouldn't be, even in today's society, 30 is not looked at the same for men and for women.
Yeah, but I mean, but I will say that's the same number for men and for women now. So if you're on a date with the girl, we're all 30s, 40s. So if she tells you 4, that's for the guys watching. I don't know. But anyway, but it was like 26 and 31 or something like that. I will say this was blacks, whites were a little lower, Hispanics were a little higher. But it's all. I think that there are a couple different things. So there's the cultural change that's gone into sexuality, and there's also the feminization of men. I will say one quick line. I mean, I don't think. Now, first of all, submission, if you've ever done any BDSM, you know that the sub in many ways is in charge. Like, the old Greek female line is the head moves the neck. So as a woman, I'm fine listening to the bigger guys, the boss of the house, but I'm going to have my own opinions if I wildly disagree. So submission doesn't mean the husband is the boss per se, as an executive in an office is. But anyway, women, I don't think have, in my experience, a problem submitting or being non-dominant most of the time with men. I think they have a problem submitting with weak men. So I think as fewer men seem to want that traditional role, seem to want to bust their ass at a job, defend the house, get married, you're going to see fewer women that want to be a quote-unquote trad wife. When you look at a lot of the guys on the internet, you can't imagine them necessarily coming home to a perky blonde in a house dress baking muffins. That's just a reality. But I mean, you have cultural change that's included the feminization of men, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of that is the result of the underlying social and even legal changes. So, I mean, if you pass a law that says you can get divorced for no reason, or you pass a law, I mean, this was welfare through 98? If you pass a law saying you get $500 for each kid you have if there's no man in the house, you're going to see marriage fall out of fashion. So I think my only point is those two go together. And that's the reality. Right now we're in that cultural place. Right now we're in that legal place. And that's probably my last comment for this. I'd be interested for Delano. Shamika's had some great points, Charles. But what are we going to do to change that?
Yeah, I
Because
was
people
going to
talk
see.
about this all the time. Like my
Yeah.
white religious friends, all my black buddies, Hispanics that come here and are shocked. Like, what the fuck? What's going on with men in America? But I haven't heard any solutions. So I'm curious.
I mean, this Delano's topic. So I think I want to end with Delano. I was going to go. That was where I was going to go. So Shamika,
Sure.
what do you think? What do we do about it? Do
I
you want to
think
be a trad wife? Do you want to be trad's wife? Is trad a person or no?
Traditional.
I know,
Yeah.
right?
You want to be
Like
trad?
a home baker, like a trad wife. This is something.
So
there
trad's
might be-
not a guy, right?
No, it's
Yeah,
Chad.
I'm kidding.
No, there was a huge trad wife debate on like social today while I was at these meetings and I was on the radio station. I mean, where women were saying, I'd have no trouble being in the kitchen and the bedroom and the closet getting ready like a lot every day if my husband was a big, tough guy that was working, that was paying every bill, that was bringing money home. I managed a lot of that money. I felt he could defend me. It was very specific. Like, I would love to be a traditional wife in that situation, but is that as possible? And I mean, me and the guys in the conversation were like, yeah, it is, But half the guys saying that weren't married. So that really is the structural issue there, I think. Shit, I'm not married.
Shamika?
There are a lot of guys in these long-term fiancé
You the problem.
relationships, and that's part of the issue, too. That's the men's side.
Yes, I would love to do that, but I think that and I did that. The issue was society did not accept it. At least in my group of friends and the people that I knew, I was ridiculed a lot. Oh, girl, I wouldn't let him be telling me what I can and can't do. Oh, girl, I would have to have my own money. Oh, girl, and I didn't realize how blessed I was to be able to be home. So I say it all the time. I would do it with a better attitude because I did start to feel like, am I echoing?
No, you sound good.
I did start to feel like looking at my other female friends who were working that I was missing out. Although now as an adult and seeing my children, do very well in society, I'm glad that I was home and I feel like that was the best thing for them. But when I was going through it, I started to feel like, I'm missing out because I don't have a job and I'm not bringing money to the table. Although he never had to worry about if his children were sick, I was there. He never had to worry about coming home and there was no food. I always had dinner cooked. Even if I was going out, like my mother would say, I want to take you out to dinner today and just hang out. And I would say, well, I have to cook dinner first. I would cook dinner from my home first before I actually went out, to just hang out with my mom or my friends or whatever. And so I think what we need to do, I'm with the ridicule and the shame for people that actually don't look at it, the right way. Because I think that we need women to hear that it is okay to be a mom and how much of a job that is to be a wife and a mother. It doesn't make you less of a woman, and it's actually a big deal. We've kind of ridiculed women into thinking it means that they're less of a woman, and we've also started to celebrate divorce. Like I remember when I first got divorced, I was seeing all of these people have divorce parties and having these cakes with the man's head sliced off. And I was thinking, how are they celebrating? Like, this is a death. This isn't anything to cheer and make fun of, because at the end of the day, someone is missing tucking their child in at night. At the end of the day, one of the parents is missing having dinner with that child in the evening and hearing about their day when they come home from school. People need to hear that part instead of the glorification of it that we see all the time. Oh, we're going through an uncoupling. No, it's like a death, and it's nothing to really celebrate or have fun about. And so I think that we have to really start ridiculing people. I'm with the shame. My daughter told me today, Delano, you brought up fat people, fat phobic. And I said, I'm not fat phobic. I'm funk phobic. Like the funk that you smell when they walk by, or when they sit down and that sit down air comes up. I'm funk phobic.
And to the listeners who are hearing impaired or didn't quite get that, she said funk, F-U-N-K, phobic. Not that makes it any better. I'm sorry you have to follow that, Delano, but you're used to it on Fearless. But I will say that I just do want to, make sure people understand when she talks about its value in being a mother and a wife and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they just act so cavalier about it. You mean and doing it right. So some people are doing it, but they ain't doing it right.
Yeah.
So they just, kind of, half-assing it. So of course, if you do it that way, you're like, why is this thing not working? Why is he not reciprocating? It's because it's obvious you're phoning it in. So that may be part of it. But, Delano, what do you wanted to say about his question of what we can do about it?
A couple of things, and I'll speak to my personal experience, right? After we had our third child, my wife and I talked about it. We decided that she was going to leave her job. Now, this is a conversation that had been sort of years in the making. The first time she floated the idea of being a stay-at-home mom, I was like, oh no, you make good money and this and the next. Because again, even me, someone who is a free thinker and all this other stuff and grew up in the church, I didn't realize how much I had been impacted by feminism. Because I looked at my wife, who I think she was sort of saying it tongue in cheek at the time, but I looked at her primarily as a wage earner. I thought the greatest contribution she could make to our family was by bringing in money. And I get that from a society that says that it values teachers unless it's a woman staying at home to teach her own children, right? It values childcare givers, right? Daycare workers, early education professionals. Again, unless it's a woman staying home to take care of her own children. It values women who manage large, complex enterprises. If you're the COO of Facebook, you go, girl, lean in. But if you're managing your own home and the expenses and the revenue in that home and everything else that it takes to operate a home, then society says, oh no, you're just wasting your time. Pay somebody else to do that. And then when you pay that person, right? And we're at a point now where some of the people in our community who claim that they're oppressed had grandmothers who were domestic. And the women today pay other women to clean their homes and watch their children, right? So you can see just in the course of 3 generations how much things can change. But eventually, my wife and I, we talked about it, prayed about it, we made that decision. And, we're still early on. And not only does she, stay home, but we homeschooling. And I'll say this, and I think any family, if you want to make that choice to homeschool, wife to come home, I'm all for it. When I met my wife, she was finishing her PhD, right, in education administration. She finished at Hampton. So I feel like my children benefit not just because they have their mom, but because she is educated and she's smart and wise and all those other things. But ultimately, those things pale in comparison to the fact that nobody is going to love a child more than their own parents in an ideal world. And she gets an opportunity to impart wisdom and knowledge to the next generation, which is the most important job, which is why parents spend so much time freaking out and being anxious about where their kids are going to go to school. So I think a lot of this, to Shamika's point, has to do with how society views these things and ultimately how individuals view these things and what they view as the most important things in life. And ultimately, I think we're a society that doesn't value children as much as we should. We say we do, but any society that will allow grown men to dress up in as the most caricatured versions of women with devil's horns and lipstick and fake breasts and fake butts to go and read to kids in the public library and teach them how to twerk. Any society that allows that really doesn't care for children. So that's just my own personal story. So I know a number of Black women who would say, yeah, I'd love to come home and we all know this, Black women been in the workforce. But before it was our grandmothers and great grandmothers had to take care of white people's children. Now, my prayer is that in the future generations, they have the benefit of being able to stay home and take care of their own, which means that men have to step up and they have to assume their role. And then as you see the parts of the organism start to fit together and work as one, as in unison, not my money, her money, our money, not my kids, her kids, our children. So that's my own personal story. In terms of solutions moving forward, I think some are policy solutions. I think the decision to take vocational education and the vocational arts out of schools, particularly high schools, was a terrible mistake. Right? I think young boys need to learn to do things with their hands as early as possible. And if you ask me today whether I would prefer my 2 young sons in 15 years to be at a university putting down big money to get to take classes in, liberal arts, no disrespect to liberal arts majors, where they leave our home and they go to college and pay somebody to convince them that men can have children, or if I could decide that my sons learn how to build a house or weld or do plumbing or HVAC, that's an easy decision. It's not a decision I would have made 10 years ago because I was like, education is everything. I mean, I got a couple degrees, you know what I mean? And so I'm an education guy, but I'm a knowledge guy because you can be a plumber and read Cicero if you want to. Right? Knowledge is a lifelong endeavor. So in terms of policy, vocational arts in the schools, as Will said, there's certain laws and policies around divorce that I don't know if particularly even conservatives have the stomach to really reverse some of those trends. But particularly in the Black community, I would want to attack this on a cultural level. All of us have been to schools where from the time kids are 3 or 4 or 5 years old, the school is putting up class of, 2039, Harvard, Yale, Hampton, Howard, Fisk. So schools who serve a majority Black clientele and sometimes low-income Black students, schools who know that those kids do not come from homes where both of their parents have degrees, have no problem promoting to their students something that they feel the children should aspire to. You should go to college. Marriage is no different. To me, it's no different. You should, if you were talking about having kids, you should be a husband. You should be a wife. That is a good thing. All this sort of value neutral, you don't want nobody to feel uncomfortable. I wasn't raised like that. You know what I mean? So that's a foreign concept to me. I think there's certain things that people should do and there's certain things that people should not do. And I feel comfortable expressing that. I think having Black leaders who bang the drum of the success sequence everywhere they go, finish school, get married, finish school, get a job, get married, then have children. If you do those things, by the time you hit your mid-30s, your chances of being in poverty are at about 3%. To me, that's a much more salient message than the NAACP going out to Hollywood and getting some B and C list actors, white actors, I take responsibility for racism. Who cares? Honestly, who cares what you think? Robin DiAngelo, Tim Wise, Jane Elliott, no disrespect to my elders, put all those people in a boat, push it off the Atlantic, and let them go do something else with their time. Because if the Black elites solution to issues in our community is to harangue and harass white people into being more affirming of our homes and our children, we're sunk. So I think having Black leaders who are willing to speak these eternal truths, they're not even hard truths, because we all know there's not too many baby mamas and baby daddies on Martha's Vineyard. The Black middle class, their problem is that they don't preach what they practice. Michelle Obama would never tell Malia and Sasha to go and get multiple children by multiple men. Now, people in her class are also not going to get up and say, you know what, we need the Black family to come back together if we have any chance at progress. Because they know they're going to get hammered by their left flank, by the feminists, by the Marxists, by all the other, people who are subversive in one way or the other. So I think we need to we need to promote marriage as a good, as a social good, promote it as the most enduring structural enabler of father involvement. We need to name the people by name who are impediments to that. So all the feminist professors, all of the male feminist guys, all of the, whether they're in academia or they're in the media, by name. We should. But that's what, when I was having my little back and forth with Brittany Cooper, I was like, no, you're a professor, Michael Eric Dyson. You begging people for reparations. Come on, man, we gotta get it together. So we have to name the people who are impediments, and we have to be comfortable everywhere that you see, every organ of culture in which we see the black elites promoting college or voting or any other things that they want black folk to do. We should insert marriage and child rearing right into that. And I think we have to get more comfortable not just saying what we want, but why we think this is important. And this really gets to sort of a metaphysical level, right? This is an issue. This is a telos issue. This is the purpose of the thing. This is an iPhone. If I make calls on it and I play music on it, you would recognize that I'm using it according to its purpose. If I use it as a coaster, you would say, you can do it that way, but that's not what an iPhone is for. In the same way, men and women, when they come together, are fit for a particular purpose. Some of that is romantic, but a big part of that is procreative. And if we want our children to grow up in the most loving, safe, stable, and secure environments possible, we have to be comfortable saying, this is good for this reason, because it was created in this particular way. And all of us understand this sort of intuitively. The data backs it up, and we need to just be more comfortable saying those things.
Well, always on point and cutting through the BS as usual. Squires, contributor to Fearless with Jason Whitlock, writer at The Blaze, and scholar at 1776 Unites. Delano, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.